Losing four of their man, I messed up. Good start to our show here. Losing four of their last 5 games, the Seahawks have yet to been able to get a consistent run game going with Ken Walker III and company. What can they do to fix their run game? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here for our Tuesday show by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s that are listening in, whether you're in nearby Redmond, Washington, or if you're over in Paris, France. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks have had a bit of a struggle as of late, losing 4 of their past 5 games. A big part of that has been the lack of a run game. We're going to be looking at what's gone wrong and how the Seahawks can get more balance on offense to help Geno Smith and company and help their defense out as well. Plus, we've got our Tell the Truth Tuesday words of wisdom, and we'll be taking a first look at the LA Rams heading towards a Week 9 clash at Lumen Field. All brought your way by friends at Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Heading into the season, there were high expectations for the Seahawks offense in general, and it wasn't just about the passing attack with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Noah Fant. There was also optimism that new coordinator Ryan Grubb was going to be able to incorporate a solid run game that could support that passing attack and help with the time of possession, which was a big part of Washington's success at the college level. But, Rob, here we are now going into Week 9, and nothing has changed statistically. In fact, you can look at last year's numbers with the Seahawks struggling running the football. They are significantly worse in a number of areas this year with Ryan Grubb so far. They have not been able to get their run game going. The running backs had under 20 yards on Sunday against the Buffalo Bills. It's pretty hard to beat any team in the NFL when your running game is that lackluster, let alone a potential Super Bowl contender in the Buffalo Bills. So much has gone wrong, and if they're going to get this season turned around and be a playoff team, they have got to find a way to get this running game going.
They really do. I mean, it's damn near impossible to have any kind of sustained success in the NFL if you can't run the football, as you just pointed out, Corbin. Anybody who is watching on YouTube, then you can see the statistics, and they are ugly. But if you are not watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Before I even get going here, thank you so much to all of you who are watching, who are listening. I'm going to rattle off some of these statistics that Corbin has posted up here for you to look at. Rushing yards, the Seahawks currently have 714 total rushing yards. That's 28th in the NFL. Rushing attempts, they're 31st in the NFL. It's damn hard to get any kind of rushing yards if you don't actually attempt to get some rushing yards. They actually have a decent yards per carry average, 4.3 yards per carry. That's 20th in the NFL. It's not great, but still, you can extrapolate 4.3 times 3 downs, and you get to 12 yards. Obviously, that is moving the chains. Rushing touchdowns, Kenneth Walker III has been brilliant in this regard. Zach Charbonnet as well. It's been truly the thunder and lightning type of approach here that the Seahawks have had some success. Yards before contact is one of the ones that frightens me the most, because that just means that you are not getting blocking at the point of attack. The Seahawks rank 28th in the NFL. They've had 422 yards before contact. Yards after contact is 292. That's 24th in the NFL. And I think that with some of the splashiest plays that we've seen Kenneth Walker III have, then that is basically boosting those numbers. I think the Seahawks would be absolutely dead last if it wasn't for a couple of the spectacular runs that Kenneth Walker III has had. So again, there are some very ugly statistics out here. And I think that there is an awful lot of blame that can be spread about, all over the place. I mean, there's no doubt that Kenneth Walker III still has a little bit of Barry Sanders Sanders to him in that he is looking to create the big play rather than sometimes just barrel ahead and get 2 or 3 yards. We saw that against the Buffalo Bills in this last loss. We also saw an inability of the two men who are in charge as far as actually being on the field, Geno Smith at the quarterback position, Connor Williams at the center position, in terms of just adjusting your play call. When you get up to the line of scrimmage and you see the way that the defense is slanted, then you have to be able to adjust. And there were times when Seattle adjusted correctly. There were some abysmal moments where they failed to adjust correctly, and that resulted in some of the worst plays for the Seahawks. And then, of course, you have to point an awful lot of blame on Ryan Grubb. As you mentioned before, his success at the University of Washington, Scott Huff as offensive line coach, the fact that the Seahawks have made some moves. They made the draft selection of Christian Haynes at right guard. They made the free agent addition of Lakeland Tomlinson. They made the trade for Connor Williams, and yet still, the Seahawks are, abysmal when it comes to the running game. Pass protection has been good, but you expected that. You have an all-pro quarterback, or at least that caliber of a quarterback in Geno Smith. Unless the Seahawks are able to get some kind of ground game going, Corbin, we're going to be having an awful lot of misery Mondays.
Yeah, this is something that's going to be continuing to be an ugly trend here for the Seahawks if they cannot get something going. Look, I talked about this yesterday on the show, but I'm going to expand on it even further. The Buffalo Bills, give them credit. They were the more physical football team on both sides of the ball. And there was a lack of respect for Seattle's passing game that you don't normally see without DK Metcalf. You can see it schematically with what Buffalo was doing. They played a lot more downs with 7 dudes in the box, and that's not normally their style. But they basically were saying, we don't think that your receivers that are healthy can beat us. We're going to get the pass rush going, and we're certainly not going to let you run the ball. So give Buffalo some credit. But look, you turn on the all-22 end zone tape in this game in particular, and as a run game guy, a person who pays a ton of attention to the schematics in the run game, and formerly coached running backs, was a run game coordinator at the high school level. Nothing is more frustrating than just watching the lack of cohesion that this offense as a whole has in the run game right now. There are plays where it doesn't look like practicing. When you see some of the angles that these guys are taking and they're having defenders shoot right past them, they don't look like they have put any work into the practice field. And we know that they practice. We know there's training camp, but it just doesn't look like a lot of the time the offensive line has had to work with blocking, and they don't look like they're ready to execute these schemes. And I mentioned yesterday just a couple of plays that stood out to me where it's like, look, I know what pin and pull looks like. I know what a power run looks like. I know what counter trey looks like. These are all plays Washington ran extremely well last year in Ryan Grubb's offense. This Seahawks team cannot run those plays consistently. And part of it is you have multiple guys blocking the same player, and then somebody's unblocked, goes in and hits Ken Walker third. I mean, look, Ken Walker had a couple runs in this game that maybe he could have got an extra yard or two if he would have just stuck his cleat in the turf and went forward. But this was not a game where I saw him bouncing outside when he shouldn't have. There was nowhere for him to go on most of these runs. And there were too many times there was immediate penetration. So I am not putting this on the running backs. The fact that they have been as effective as they have been in the red zone, that tells you all you need to know. And both these guys going into this last game, Walker and Charbonnet were averaging over 3 yards per carry after contact. So the numbers are going to suggest that, well, they're 22nd in yards after contact. They also were 31st in rushing attempts. So all those stats are going to have a impact negatively because you just haven't ran the ball. Some games have been because Ryan Grubb hasn't been willing to. There's games like this past one where I think Ryan Grubb did make a concerted effort to get the run game going, but there was no push. There's no horizontal push. I think that's the big key for our listeners to understand, that this doesn't just mean knocking guys off the line of scrimmage and driving them back 5 yards. You have to have vertical displacement when you're talking the zone run game. Buffalo was murdering the Seahawks doing that this weekend, getting these massive creases where they weren't necessarily driving guys several yards off the ball, but they were creating displacement several yards outside, and they were making gaps. So, look, I think that this, unfortunately, this is not something that Seattle can just look at one thing and say, well, let's work on this, and I think this will fix this. They've got a number of issues. I think there's concerns with the way the schemes are being operated and the way the players are executing up front. There's concerns about the lack of run game at times and feeling like Ryan Grubb is struggling to figure out what kind of balance that he can have, and just the lack of physicality up front. I think there's a lot of different things we can point to. So can this team improve their run game? Absolutely. But you're going to have to take baby steps. And right now, we aren't even seeing those from this team right now when it comes to running the football.
Yeah, and that's the thing, Corbin. I mean, you're so good at the schematics of it. I'm going to focus in on what I know best, and that's the player personnel. And just watching the tape, and I'm going to start off from the very beginning with the center and Connor Williams. I mean, he, of course, we all saw the missed snap that fired over his head like a freaking jetliner going to Boeing Field. We saw the lack of coordination between he and Geno Smith, where he steps back onto Geno Smith's foot, and that completely destroyed another red zone opportunity. What I was most concerned with is the fact that there were plays where Connor Williams just did not identify that the Buffalo Bills were severely overloading one side of the field, and the Seahawks just ran right into it rather than making the adjustment. And there were some plays where he did correctly point out way the Buffalo Bills were lined up and kind of used his arm to kind of push Laken Tomlinson and point over to the side, and it kind of changed the way things went. And I mentioned Laken Tomlinson because while I think that Connor Williams had arguably his worst day as a Seahawk, I thought that Laken Tomlinson actually played pretty damn good football. He was moving people at the line of scrimmage. I thought that Charles Cross is what Charles Cross is. He has always been more of a pass protector than he's been a run blocker. He can stone guys off, but typically he pushes them to the outside. So if Ken Walker is going to try to run upfield and then suddenly bounce to his left, then he is very likely to have a pass rusher right there in his face. He's going to have to try and get around hhim before he gets outside. And that, of course, is going to result in some negative plays. When I go to the right side, that's where I have the hugest concerns, and we all know that the revolving door that has been at the right guard position has been an issue for a while now. I think that Anthony Bradford continues to be a guy that can get that initial push, but he does not release from his initial block and get to the second level very well. He will spend too much time on that initial block, which he can be pulverizing in that way. As I mentioned before, the block that, the play where Connor Williams sky mailed the snap over Geno Smith's head. I mean, Anthony Bradford had his guy on the ground. That should have been a walk-in touchdown right up the middle. But certainly Mike Jarrell at the right tackle position, there was some huge areas of concern. And it wasn't just in terms of the offensive line. As we're going to be talking about a little bit later, Corbin, the tight ends and wide receivers, they didn't hold the water that they needed to help in the running game either. And that is a huge part of this problem for the Seahawks.
Yeah, it is a multifaceted problem. And you can look at it two ways. You can say, well, let's try to fix one thing, and then let's just see if we can have a little bit of a domino effect. Or you can say, let's try to fix everything, which is going to be really difficult to do when you don't have normal, you have walkthrough practices a lot of the time, or you're not padded during the week. It's really difficult to make those improvements. So we'll see what they decide to do. It's going back to the drawing board, but there's only one direction to go right now after this game, and that is up. And you hope that the Seahawks offense can find a way to get more balance. They can take advantage of the talent that Ken Walker III and Zach Charbonnet bring to the table. When we come back, it's Tell the Truth Tuesday. We are going to dive into some final takeaways from Sunday's loss to the Bills and kind of tie it to where the Seahawks are at after 8 weeks of the 2024 season. Don't go away. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play from across the league, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can bet on everything from Zach Charbonnet scoring a rushing touchdown against the Rams, or DK Metcalf returning from injury to be the first player with a 30-plus yard reception on Sunday. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. As we do each and every Tuesday, it's time to take one last step back and look at the previous game. Tell the Truth Tuesday, kind of tie things into where the Seahawks are at this stage of the season, pretty much the halfway point after 8 games, 9 left on the schedule. And Rob, we're going to start on the offensive side of the football, and we're going to have a little bit of a segue from our first segment when we're looking at the run game as a whole. And you already hit on this a little bit, but I thought this might have been the worst that I've seen receivers and tight ends block in a Seahawks game in 7 or 8 years, to be honest with you. It was that bad, especially at the receiver position.
Yeah, it was disappointing because obviously DK Metcalf is not on the field there. And so you need the Seahawks wide receivers just to kind of step up their physicality. And I was confident that Seattle would be able to still be able to run block because I was confident in size, physicality, and the smarts that Jake Bobo would be providing for the Seahawks. I expected him to play significantly more action. He did. I expected Laviska Shenault to play significantly more. He did. And yet the Seahawks were not able to create any kind of push in the running game. Now, the same thing was true in as far as pass catchers. I mean, Laviska Shenault had 1 catch. Tyler Lockett had 1 catch. Jackson Smith and Jigba had 6 of the 9 total receptions that went to wide receivers. And look, I mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba in a positive light for a moment here because in terms of run blocking, he was Seattle's worst of their wide receivers. I mean, there were more whiffs on his part. There were more defenders that he was assigned to block that actually made the tackle in the hole for 2 or 3 yards or less than any other pass catcher on Seattle, including the tight ends. And I've been, knocking Pharaoh Brown now for a while, and he's a solid player. Don't get me wrong. But at the same time, he is not a superstar when it comes to the blocking game. He provides you very, very little in terms of the receiving game. So again, I just wonder why Noah Fant wasn't on the field a little bit more than he was. I just thought that this was just an average effort in terms of the planning, certainly in terms of the execution from Seattle's pass catchers. And to me, that's one of the reasons why I'm going to put this LA Dodgers hat on here for a moment. And I know that there's going to be some who are thinking I'm trying to trigger the Seahawks because, of course, they'll be going against the LA Rams. The LA Dodgers are a game away from the World Series championship, not because their superstar hitters have played well, although Freddie F. and Freeman has been unbelievable, but it's because their pitching has been able to slow down the Yankees. So it's one unit is actually playing above average when they need to. And that's the thing, is the Seahawks knew that they didn't have DK Metcalf. They knew that they have a little bit of some problems at the right tackle position. They needed their receivers and their tight ends to step up, and they did not do so. And that's the biggest reason why the Seahawks lost.
Yeah, listen, like I said, that was one of the worst displays of blocking from auxiliary players that I have seen in a Seahawks game since I have been covering this football team as a reporter. You mentioned Jackson Smith and Jigba. There was one time where he deked himself out. He juked himself out while he was trying to go for a block and came up completely empty. I don't think he touched the guy he was trying to block. And I was impressed from what I saw from him in the preseason when he had his chances to block, but it feels like in a regular season that is not carried over against starting defenses. He has not been able to get the job done. You had receivers ending up in the same spot as offensive linemen a couple of times. So you're wondering again about the schematic stuff. What is being coached up to these guys? But that's got to be better. I want to take a second, though, and talk about a positive coming out of the All-22. And listen, the Seahawks dropped back to throw 36 times in this football game. And some of those resulted in scrambles. Some of them resulted in balls being knocked down, you name it. But I counted 9 pressures on those 36 plays. And that also includes Mike Jarrell giving up a sack late in the game. Got beat by Javon Solomon, who got around the edge on him and sacked Geno Smith. It was the only sack they gave up. They gave up 9 pressures. And again, there's subjectivity to that. But I, in particular, want to talk about that third drive, Rob, where the Seahawks drove all the way down to the 2-yard line of the Bills. Geno Smith went 9 for 9 on that drive. And I thought that was one of the best drives Ryan Grubb has called all year because he was mixing in play action out of shotgun, off of reverses. He was mixing in some pistol play action. He did some things to help his offensive line out, but Geno had amazing pockets that entire drive. And there were a couple times where he almost looked like, well, I have to move up in the pocket because this is not normal for me. What am I supposed to do? He had really nice pockets in front of him. And I thought for most of the game, late when they were just trying to play catch up, it gets a lot harder in those situations because the other team knows you're throwing the football and they are able to pin their ears back. You saw more pressure then, but if there's a positive to take from this game on offense, Charles Cross, I thought, had a masterful game in pass protection. I had him down for one pressure. Mike Jarrell had long stretches in this game where he was solid. There were some misses, but I thought both the guards did pretty well in pass protection. Connor Williams was probably the weakest link in pass protection in this game, and I didn't think that he was bad necessarily in that regard. Run blocking was a different story, but to me, that is the big positive coming out of the All-22 review is, wow, the pass protection was actually pretty darn good for the most part in this game, and they gave Geno time to throw. It's unfortunate that there was not a run game to complement that because this could have been a much different game if the Seattle Seahawks were even able to run the football with a little bit of success. Now, on the defensive side of the football, look, the stars have been showing up for the Seahawks on offense for most of this season. When DK Metcalf's been available, he's had a lot of big games. There's been big games from Jack Smith and Jigba. Ken Walker III, despite the run blocking in front of him, has had a few games that he's broke out. It doesn't feel like the defensive stars, though. When they're playing the better teams, you're not seeing the Devin Witherspoons of the world rise up and play to the level that they're expected to play as budding stars. They're not playing to that level when they need to.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the reasons why I'm wearing this LA Dodgers hat right now is because, look, I'd love for this baseball World Series to become exciting and some of the Yankees' big sluggers start to kind of, live up to all of their hype, and that's what it feels like the Seahawks defensive players especially were unable to do against the Buffalo Bills. And look, again, the Buffalo Bills are a really, really good team. But again, as I mentioned before, I think that the reason why I'm wearing this hat is just the simple analogy that sometimes when one side of your team is not performing up to expectation, whether because of injuries or whatever the case might be, then the other guys have to step up. And you just look at the big names that the Seahawks have on defense. I'll start with the head coach, Mike McDonald. He was brought in to be the defensive mastermind to be able to kind of help some things. And this is the same run defense that got Pete Carroll kicked out of town. But Leonard Williams was basically invisible in this game. You mentioned Devin Witherspoon. I mean, Khalil Shakir, again, had 9 receptions himself, equaling the number of receptions that any of the Seahawks wide receivers had in combined, a combination of all of them. I think that you have to mention a guy like Boye Mafe, who, again, as I mentioned in yesterday's show, didn't have a single tackle. You mentioned a reference yesterday, Corbin, that I don't know that a lot of our 21st generation, 22nd generation now, or 21st century, fans would know. And Plaxico Burress. Well, I got one from John Plutarski from Animal House way back in 1960, and 0.0. I mean, that was the effectiveness from Boye Mafe. Derek Hall at least showed a little bit of fire. He at least had 3 solo tackles. So again, something in that regard. I just thought that it was very disappointing that the way that the Buffalo Bills kind of also were able to dominate the football field. We expected a nickel corner to be able to take over this football game. Unfortunately, it was Teron Johnson, a 4th-round pick out of Weber State for the Buffalo Bills, rather than Devin Witherspoon, obviously number 5 overall selection for the Seahawks. We expected a defensive lineman, whether it be Byron Murphy, whether it be Leonard Williams, again, to be able to take over this football game. Instead, Eli Ankou was the guy that took over. Now, hey, he's a Canadian-born football player. I love it from the CFL perspective. But still, he was in the practice squad a couple of days before the Bills brought him up, and he absolutely terrorized the interior of the Seahawks offensive line. So, again, the Seahawks needed their prime-time players to show up on a game that literally was prime time, and they failed to do so.
And that is a perfect lead into my takeaway here for Tell the Truth Tuesday. And it's piggybacking off what Mike McDonald said yesterday in regard to Trey Brown. Trey Brown dressed on Sunday. He was questionable, ended up suiting up, but he did not play a single defensive snap in that game. And his explanation on Monday morning on Seattle Sports was, well, he hadn't been practicing during the week. That's why we went with that. But then he finished the sentence saying, basically, we are evaluating that cornerback spot moving forward. Then yesterday, he was point blank asked if Trey Brown was going to jump back into the lineup or it's a competition. He immediately said it's a competition. Josh Jobe had a pick in this last game. He had 2 pass breakups in the game before in Atlanta. They like Nehemiah Pritchett if he's back from his ankle injury. You have reached the point now, and listen, this is going to be my verbiage. It's about damn time there's been some competition because The honeymoon period is over for returning players that are on this roster. Mike McDonald needs to find the guys in the weekend. Look at Kobe Bryant, for example. I know he's a returning player, but he was not a starter at the beginning of the year. But Mike McDonald raved about his practice habits and what he was doing in the film room, consistently bringing him up and the work he had put in. He wanted to get him on the field to reward him. You want to reward guys that put that work in during the week and prepare themselves. If Josh Jobe is that guy, then you want to reward him. If Nehemiah Pritchett's that player, you want to reward him. You know, Trey Brown's got one of the worst passer ratings against the NFL for a corner this year. So, you know, it kind of going back to the Animal House reference right now. Trey Brown better get it together or he's going to be on double secret probation here. He's not going to be getting back into the lineup for the Seattle Seahawks. So the competition aspect, I think you got to see it at guard. We've talked about that all season, but give Christian Haynes more opportunities than one or two series and see if you can really ratchet up that competition. That other cornerback spot, maybe linebacker for Tyrell Dodson. Tyrese Knight, give him a chance to play that weak side linebacker spot next to Ernest Jones. I don't know what they're going to end up doing, but you got to start mixing and matching some things. And some of these veteran players, you got to put them on notice a little bit as the head coach. So I'm excited to see there's some competition now. Let's see if it actually plays out and who's going to be out there when the Seahawks are playing the Rams on Sunday. Coming up next, speaking of those Rams, it's time to take a first look at the Rams who are now surging. They're 3-4. They're getting close to being back in the mix there in the NFC West. What's new for one of Seattle's bitter rivals in the NFC West? We'll get to that up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Hillsdale College. History, economics, the great works of literature, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution. Maybe you did or didn't study those things in school. Whether or not you did, it's time for a refresher. Time and technology have changed a lot of things, but they have not changed our basic fundamental truths about the world and our place in it. So Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses. Just a few of the offerings out there. Constitution 101, the meaning of the history of the Constitution, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, and a brand new documentary-style course on Marxism, socialism, and communism. All of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced so that you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper on readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. This episode is also brought your way by Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's just you against the numbers. And Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, Prize Picks keeps your lineup live. And Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out your lineup even if it isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's the code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks will look to snap a 3-game losing streak at Lumen Field. It's still unheard of. It's foreign coming off my tongue that the Seahawks have lost 3 consecutive games at home, but that's the state of where things stand. The Rams are going to be coming in riding momentum. Just beat the Minnesota Vikings on Thursday Night Football. They got those 3 extra days of rest as well. Cooper Kupp's back. They've also got Puka Nacua back as well. So both their star receivers, there's still some major injuries that they are dealing with that guys will not be back this week. But still, this feels like the Rams team we expected to see that was going to be very much in the thick of things in the NFC West, Robin. And maybe the thing that's the biggest storyline when you're looking at what's new, this defensive line is growing up very quickly in life after Aaron Donald. The first couple weeks were a struggle, but now Jared Verse, who was one of my favorite players in this draft class, he's starting to wreak havoc off the edge. And Braden Fisk, his college teammate at Florida State, he's also starting to figure things out inside next to Kobe Turner. I mean, this is a team that's got a lot of young talent on its defensive line, and it's starting to play like the Rams were hoping they were going to, which that creates some issues for the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, that's the thing, Corbin, is, of course, it's the brand. It's the same coaching staff for the most part. Of course, the defensive coordinator, Raheem Morris, now is the Atlanta Falcons head coach. But for the most part, it's the same coaching staff. For the most part, it's the same personnel in terms of the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned Cooper Kupp is returning. Puka Nacua has been, when he has been healthy, he has been a spectacular player, going back to his days at the University of Washington, frankly. So that's not a surprise. Obviously, Matthew Stafford is a terrific player. Kyron Williams, the running back position, is a very good player as well. To me, the fascinating thing has been the draft picks that have played so well so early. You mentioned Jared Verse, and he was very much in play for the Seahawks in their first round pick, and they literally had him come in, to the VMAC in an official visit. And one of the things I always liked about Jared Verse is just the physicality and intensity with which he plays. He was a very good pass rusher. He is every bit as good as a run defender, and he is just super intense. And so I think that has helped him translate the success that he had in 2 stops in his college career, now into the NFL. Braden Fisk, as you said, was his college roommate, and he also is big, physical, and tough. And so again, I think that if you were expecting, if fans out there are expecting that the LA Rams defensive line is taking a step back with the retirement of Aaron Donald, look, I get it. I understand why you would think that. That seems logical. It has not. This is a young group of defensive linemen that are really starting to play very good football. Omar Spates, the middle linebacker position, is also starting to play good football. Cameron Kitchens, if he gets onto the field, he is playing good football. They've got a rookie center, and Bo Limmer from Arkansas, who is playing good football. And then if something happens to Kyron Williams at the running back position, then Blake Corum is absolutely spectacular as well. Another key addition to the Rams is the fact that they have Jimmy Garoppolo now as the backup quarterback behind Matthew Stafford. So this is not like in the past where if Stafford got hurt, then the Rams had a significant drop off at the quarterback position. So again, this is a Rams squad, Corbin, that I think is very, very dangerous. And I think one of the biggest reasons why Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach of the Seahawks is because of the inability to match up against the LA Rams. If Mike McDonald does not win this football game, then you expect a heck of a lot more boo birds out there, a heck of a lot more fans wearing the opposing team's colors showing up. This is the game the Seahawks have got to win. And I don't see that very often when here we are just a couple of days before Halloween.
Yeah, this is a must-win game, especially when you consider that they're 0-1 in the NFC West. They have had fewer games in division than anybody else. You need these games. And this is a chance for the Rams. I mean, if you can put them down to 3-5, maybe they go back to thinking about maybe we'll trade somebody like a Cooper Kupp. But if they win this game and they're 4-4, like they're right in the thick of things to win this division. So this is a huge game for both teams. The Rams are still trying to play back into division title hunt. The Seahawks, they're just trying to stay in the hunt themselves. After that 3-0 start, they've lost 4 of their last 5 games. So they're just trying to right the ship and find some consistency. But one other player that I want to mention here when we're talking about what's new, it isn't necessarily new in the sense that Darius Williams is a familiar name for Seahawks fans. Russell Wilson in particular threw interceptions at Darius Williams pretty much every time the Rams played the Seahawks for a couple of years. He went to Jacksonville as a free agent for a few seasons. He came back this offseason. He was hurt early in the year, and the Rams defense was in shambles. But ever since he came back a few weeks ago, this defense has been playing 10 times better. Obviously, the front line's been a big part of that. But getting Darius Williams out there to bring that seasoned vet that can create turnovers, can come up and tackle, that has been a huge addition to the Rams defense. In the last 4 games, Rob, they are 8th in the NFL in points allowed. Before Williams was back, they were near the bottom of the NFL. So they have really turned things around on the defensive side. There's a number of reasons behind that, but getting Darius Williams back, that seasoned vet that can be the leader of your secondary, he has taken that mantle, and this defense is just playing much better since he got back in the lineup. And obviously he loves playing the Seahawks, though. That was when Russell Wilson was the quarterback. We'll see what it looks like with Geno Smith under center now for the Seahawks as the starting quarterback. And we'll be diving into all those key matchups that we're going to be looking at coming up on tomorrow's show. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Again, coming up tomorrow, it's Matchup Wednesday. We'll dive into all the key matchups. A Rams team has got a lot of different players that we're going to be discussing compared to prior seasons when these two teams have met. We'll look at offense and defense for the Seahawks and the Rams. That'll be coming up tomorrow. Make sure you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.